Hello, and thank you for joining for this FortiSIEM overview. We're going to cover off a few presentation slides and so you get an understanding of the key capabilities of FortiSIEM and where we can provide value. And then we'll move into a demonstration of the actual GUI of FortiSIEM and so you can get an understanding and feeling of how this works. First of all, let's discuss some of the key features within FortiSIEM. One of these key features is something called asset discovery. And this is where we can actually understand a great deal of information about the devices in the network. Much more than relying on log-only discovery of devices, where you might understand that this is a FortiGate or a Cisco ASA or maybe a Windows server. We'll get much more information. And we'll discuss all of these points in more depth as we go through. There's a scalable and rapid integration of devices, but the scalable platform is a key piece within FortiSIEM. It allows you to start relatively small with maybe a single either appliance, physical or virtual, and scale out as your needs increase. But that scale out capability is really straightforward with FortiSIEM. We have automated workflows which help with things like instant response, case management, and even remediation of an incident should something occur in your network, being able to go and perform actions quickly on that. We have a single pane of glass, and really this is allowing us to consolidate network operations and security operations features and functions into a single pane of glass, a single console ultimately. So with FortiSIEM you could be looking at performance data as well as security data in the same views. We have this unified platform, and really what we're talking about here is that if you're a managed security service provider, you can deploy FortiSIEM in a multi-tenant capability. And really, you're using the same platform here. Of course, it will depend on the different models, whether it's co-hosted or if you're using a shared platform. But using a shared platform, it's fully multi-tenant. And this allows you to quickly deploy new customers to the platform and use the shared infrastructure to support them. We of course have things like role-based access control, which applies to both multi-tenant systems of FortiSIEM as well as what we would call enterprise, the non-multi-tenant versions. And then we also have FortiGuard intelligence, and this allows us to bring threat intelligence from our FortiGuard services directly into FortiSIEM. And this includes things like IP addresses, URLs, but we can also bring in other threat intelligence feeds, whether they are commercial feeds that we support a number of, open source feeds, and we also support things like Stix and Taxi, both version 1.2 and version 2 of Stix and Taxi. So the network operations and security operations single pane of glass, what we're really talking about here is being able to centralize and understand your environment in a single console. And the way we're going to do this is by bringing in the information about the devices into a CMDB. And this is where we go off and actually discover those devices using, I would say, common operational protocols like JDBC if it's a database, SNMP for things like network type devices, as well as things like Linux or Unix devices. Or if it's Windows, we could be using something like WMI to discover them. So depending on what type of device or application we're going to discover, we'll apply the right type of protocol against it. And when we discover that device, we'll understand everything from serial numbers to versions to interface statuses to what processes are running on those devices to what SQL commands are being executed as well. So there's a lot more intelligence, not relying on log data alone, that we can get in FortiSIEM through the use of the CMDB and this discovery and performance, or what we call operational monitoring. We can still receive log data, and again there's a variety of different methods of collecting log data in FortiSIEM. If it's a network type device such as a firewall, then we could be collecting things like syslog, and we support different syslog protocols, so things like UDP and TCP. But we can also receive flow data, we could receive SNMP traps, as well as again integrating directly with those devices. So if it was Windows, we could use WMI, or if it's a database, then we could use JDBC. And there's a wide variety of different other APIs that we integrate with. And then we can also integrate with FortiGuard, as I mentioned, for threat intelligence. So here we'll be using that to correlate if we see a particular maybe permitted firewall event with a source IP address or destination. We can look that up in the FortiGuard threat intelligence or other threat intelligence providers, and we can correlate that in real time to provide an alert. So with this single pane of glass, what we've got here is the security context and the operational context. So we mentioned about the scalable architecture, but what really does this mean for us? And I said we can start small. So you can start with a single appliance. And if we did that, it would be called the supervisor appliance. The supervisor appliance can perform all the functions of FortiSIEM. So it can collect the data, it can pass the data, correlate the data, it provides the graphical interface as well for FortiSIEM. But a single supervisor may not have the capability to provide the performance, the reporting, the correlation requirements for your environment. So how do we scale this? Well, what we then do is we need to make a decision of where we're going to store the data. If you're using a single appliance, be that virtual or physical appliance, then we can use either a virtual disk or the built-in storage in those appliances. But when we're scaling out, we need to either use something called NFS or Elasticsearch as the back-end database. And those options are down to the customer. We tend to work with customers to define what's best for their situation. So you would choose what type of database you're going to use, whether it's NFS or Elastic, and then you start deploying what we call worker nodes. And these worker nodes, you can deploy as many of these as needed to support your performance and requirements. And then what we're actually doing once we define these is forming a cluster. And this cluster is a scale-out cluster, so the more workers that you deploy, the more correlation you can do in real time, and also the faster things like reporting can become as well. You don't need to worry about, though, where the data flows into this cluster. This is the simplified architecture as well within FortiSIEM, because as long as the data flows up into this cluster, then the data will be correlated and it will be saved and it can be searched as well. How we get that data in? Well, I already mentioned that a supervisor is essentially an all-in-one appliance. So if you're just using a supervisor, you could be sending data directly to that. Or if you're using worker nodes as well, again, you could be sending maybe log data, or the worker nodes could be pulling log data directly from your devices. But quite typically, what we see customers deploying for a number of different reasons are collectors. And collectors are also physical or virtual appliances. And their role is really to go off and maybe discover devices as well. They're able to collect data using different protocols and APIs. They're able to receive the data in protocols like syslog, NetFlow, SNMP traps, and again pass that data. And they've got another function here, is that they can cache the data if the main cluster is unavailable for some reason. They'll compress the data and they'll securely transmit the data as well up to the cluster, assuming it's a cluster. If you don't have a cluster of worker nodes, then the collectors can forward directly to the supervisor node. So the CMDB within FortiSIEM, I'll explain a little bit more about this now, and we'll have a look at this when we move into the actual demonstration. But from here, this is what the main view for the CMDB. You can actually see how we are discovering a device, how we're collecting the information. And when we do discover this device, we'll automatically put the device in the appropriate CMDB group here. So if it's a Windows server, it will appear in the Windows group. If it's a firewall, it will appear in the firewall group. And then once we've done that discovery of the device, we'll be able to understand what the configuration of the device is, because we'll pull back the configuration. We'll understand the performance of the device, interface utilization, process utilization, CPU, memory, disk utilization as examples. So we get much more context than if we were relying on log data alone. And then we can start to drill down into more information. So we can quickly say, give us the quick information, as we call it. It will give us a health summary. If there's any incidents against this device, it will give us the performance information. And then we can keep going into further sections to understand more health information. The CMDB also allows us to model something called a business service, and the business services are a grouping of devices and applications, and it allows us to understand if we had an incident affecting a server, what impact is that having within our environment? What business services are being affected? Is it the PCI service? Is it the email service? Is it the payroll service? And we're able to quickly discern this information by modeling what devices and applications are in those services. And then we've got various different views available. So as an example, here is a dashboard view for the business services where we can understand the red, amber, green state of these actual business services and then continue to drill down into more information as needed. So now we'll have a quick look at dashboards, the analytics and reporting. There are many out-of-the-box dashboards within FortiSIEM. So you could be looking at something called a security dashboard and understanding your perimeter, so your border devices and the flow of traffic across those. So for the permitted, the failed traffic, where the traffic is coming from, both the internal sources as well as external sources, and you can customize these dashboards as needed as well. So we may start off with a default perimeter dashboard, but then you can add your own what we call widgets into those and change the way you visualize this data as well. So you could have this as geographical maps, scatter charts, pie charts, bar charts, table views, gauges, etc. In terms of analytics, we have over 2,000, almost close to 3,000 different reports built in within FortiSIEM, ready to go. So you can customize all of these reports if you needed to. Typically there is a report to meet most requirements, as you can imagine, with all of those reports available, but you can customize any of those as you need. And of course you can build up your own searches from scratch, which is really easy to do. And as people become more proficient in FortiSIEM, that's quite often the way people look and search for data. It's just by simply building your own search. And any of these searches that you create, you can save them and turn those into reports. Any of the reports can then also be added to a dashboard as a widget as well. So using reports, you can create your own dashboards. We've got over 600 different rules built in, and these cover both correlation types of scenarios for security, change, performance, availability, as well as statistical rules. So these statistical rules are where we're looking for deviations against baselines and generating, of course, alerts as a result of it. The analytics search is also multi-tabbed, and by multi-tab that allows us to start with maybe a generic search, identify something of interest, and then continuously add that to filters or new tabs, so we can always go back to maybe our original search just by switching through these tabs. In terms of reports, I mentioned there's almost close to 3,000 reports now, but we can also create our own custom reports. So that's using something, the report builder, and it allows us to generate reports with different sections such as pie charts, bar charts, different text sections, tables, etc. So you've got a flexible reporting engine in FortiSIEM to represent the data as needed. So let's just quickly talk about vulnerabilities and risk. So within FortiSIEM, we're able to pull in vulnerability data from a number of different vulnerability scanners. And when we collect this data in, we store the vulnerability information against the asset. And we use this vulnerability data along with other metrics to determine a risk score against devices and users. So here we have, as an example, a risk score against a few different devices. And how this is calculated, as I mentioned it, we use the vulnerability information that we got from vulnerability scanners, but also things like the device criticality, the number and the type of instance that we're seeing targeting these devices. And as we receive this intelligence, this information, we're going to adjust the risk score accordingly. So you'll see risk score increasing as we see more incidents or more vulnerabilities occurring against the device. And at the same time, as we start to see incidents resolved, that risk score may drop there afterwards. So it's adjusting all the time. Customizing your environment with FortiSIEM. So we support hundreds of different vendors out of the box. And the way we support these is actually a twofold process within FortiSIEM, because we need to support them from a log perspective. So from the events, understanding those events, and the way we do these is through parsers. And another perspective is actually understanding what those devices or applications are. So that's a discovery piece. So we've got these hundreds and hundreds of different devices and applications supported out of the box, but you can add your own. And the way you can add your own support for different devices is through creating custom parsers. And the parsers that we have out of the box, we don't hide the way we do this. All of these are available for customers to view, modify, or use these as templates to create your own parsers for maybe your own custom integrations. And the same approach regarding integration of devices for a discovery process as well. You can also customize any of the existing integrations. So by that, if you wanted to monitor specific OIDs for SNMP, then you can define that customization within FortiSIEM, even if they are for existing devices. You can create your own custom rules, and this allows you to start to customize FortiSIEM for your specific use cases, as well as custom reports and custom dashboards as well. Instant investigation and remediation within FortiSIEM. We provide the capabilities within FortiSIEM to detect incidents, for you to be able to quickly analyze those and then respond to those as well. And later, the recovery process. So what we're trying to do is reduce the mean time to detection and the mean time to resolution. So one way that FortiSIEM allows us to do this is through the remediation framework. To give you an example of how this works is, if we saw an attack via a FortiGate which triggers an IPS event, and it could be other firewalls, not just a FortiGate, but I'm using this as of course as an example here. The FortiGate generates that IPS event, which may be received by a collector, or it could be directly by FortiSIEM itself. The collector will forward that event up to the supervisor node. In this environment, we just have an all-in-one supervisor. This will identify that there's been an IPS event occurring, and it will generate an incident. Based on the policy that's defined, that incident will then trigger a remediation. We call this a notification. And the notification then can be enforced by the collector on the actual FortiGate or other firewall. And that enforcement could be as simple as quarantine an IP address. But another type of remediation that is available could be around DNS black holing, or it could be restarting a process. So we have a number of different remediations built out of the box for a wide variety of vendors as well, that can be enforced either in near real time, or it could be a manual enforcement. So as part of the triage process of an analyst or user investigating the incident, realizes that we need to block an IP address, that enforcement could be a manual action in terms of, I see the incident, go and remediate it. So in summary, the benefits of FortiSIEM is a scalable, rapid integration of devices and applications into FortiSIEM itself. It's got a low overhead in terms of ongoing administration of the actual platform itself. So really we're trying to enable customers to get the maximum value from FortiSIEM and using it for their detection capabilities. And that also then moves us into the incident response and remediation. Once we've detected incident, we've got this remediation framework. And we provide this single pane of glass view, the operation as well as the security operations view of your environment. And of course, we bring in the FortiGuard threat intelligence, as well as other threat intelligence vendors to help support your investigation and your detection with FortiSIEM. So let's move across and have a look at FortiSIEM in the GUI. So I've just logged into FortiSIEM and I'm presented with the overview of incidents that are happening in the environment. There are a lot of incidents in this environment as it's a demo system where we continuously generate new incidents. So this isn't what we would typically expect to see in a real environment, but it's going to allow us to investigate a number of different incidents if we wish, as well as get a good understanding of the interface. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the top section here. And one thing that you'll notice is that we have security, performance, availability, and change. And that's because we perform all of these capabilities within FortiSIEM. We can detect security incidents as well as availability or change. And if we wanted to understand more about these, we can quickly drill down into more information just by selecting one of these, and it takes us across into a slightly different view, which gives us all of the incidents that are listed out. But before we start drilling down into more information here, let's just go over this screen in a little bit more depth and understand what it's providing us. First of all, this section here, middle section, is going to allow us to understand what type of incidents are occurring and the volume of those incidents. As this is a demo system, I mentioned we've got lots of things which are continuously triggering off. So things like the high IPS exploits, the sandbox events, is something that we're continuously generating. Some of the more lower volume incidents, therefore, are probably a bit more interesting for us. So as an example, we could have a look at the Orders ERP system. It's got a match on the FIM agent. And really what this is FortiSIEM has two agents available, a Windows agent and a Linux agent. Now, these provide additional capabilities within FortiSIEM, and those additional capabilities include, for instance, the collection of events at higher event rates, if you're talking about Windows servers, at different event logs, text-based log files such as DNS or DHCP logs, which are useful again in threat intelligence as well as just understanding what's happening, as well as being able to create and monitor your own custom log files. Additionally though, both the Linux and Windows agent also provide file integrity monitoring. And so this allows us to monitor for changes on files, modifications, new files being created, and who are making those actual changes on those files. And if we detect a change, we generate a hash, and that hash is part of an event that comes into FortiSIEM, which we can then correlate against maybe threat feeds, such as threat feeds against the Forti sandbox, and generate an alert, again in real time, but also historically. So here we can see what type of incidents are occurring and the number of incidents. Along the bottom here, what we have are the hosts by severity of incidents, as well as we could also be looking at the risk score. Before I look at the risk score, I'm just going to look at this one here, which is the highest number of incidents. This is the Orders ERP system. We can quickly see all of those incidents occurring. And I can drill down into, again, more information if I wanted to against here. If we wanted to look at this on a risk score, we can also see that the Orders ERP has the highest risk and the highest number of incidents, so that will be found here. And it's a great place if you're an analyst to understand where you need to start an investigation. Rather than looking at individual instances, we've nicely grouped these together, created a risk score, prioritized risk scores so that you can understand where you should be focusing any investigation. A few other views on the instance section is the risk view. So the risk view allows us to understand the timeline of incidents that are occurring. Again, looking at the Orders ERP, we can see that there are vulnerabilities against these devices, but we've got a timeline of when these incidents are being detected. For instance, a manual service being started, a trusted installer. We know we've got vulnerabilities. There's low high disk latency occurring on the server itself. And we also see things like traffic to the emerging threats and outbound traffic to a country that we haven't defined as being one of our country groups where we expect traffic to go to, and even things like traffic to the FortiGuard threat intelligence list. So we're seeing a nice timeline of incidents that are occurring, and we can drill down into more information. We can also look at the triggered events of why this occurred. So we can always go back to the triggered events with FortiSIEM. We'll always have the raw logs, as well as what we call the past attributes. And the past attributes could be things like IP addresses, usernames, destination ports, could be SQL queries that are being executed. But as well as the past attributes, what we also do is we enrich that information with geolocation information. Here we can see that we've enriched it with the destination host name, but also the destination latitude, longitude as well, the destination organization. But we could also be looking at maybe an internal IP address against the CMDB in FortiSIEM and enriching the event with the information that we have of the device in the CMDB. Similarly, we can also enrich events based on users as well. If we can actually understand users behind IP addresses, then we will enrich the events with user information. If we wanted to drill down more into the incident, we can click on the incident details and we can say, let's have a look at the actual incident. We could also clear the incident. We could apply or create a ticket against this incident as well. And we can also start to look at the rules and adding maybe exceptions. If we wanted to have a look at this, then we could have a look at the incident in the list view, which I'll come across to in just a second. One other point here is able to integrate with third-party ticketing systems. FortiSIEM has its own case management system built in, but we can also integrate with external systems. And we have an API to allow this to be extended to other non-out-of-the-box supported integrations. Example of supported integrations are things like ServiceNow, ConnectWise, Remedy as examples. So let's have a look at the list view of instance within FortiSIEM. And here we're looking at all incidents that have occurred, and we can also then start to drill down and focus on maybe particular incidents. If we want to add to a filter an IP address, we drill down here and then it opens the search pane where we can start to filter. And now that we've added this IP address in here, we're seeing all incidents from this particular source. So we can actually see that there's multiple IPS exploits being targeted from this source to a particular destination. We can also see that there's multiple logon failures from this source to this particular destination as well. Unfortunately, we also see things like brute force success events or incidents. So here we've seen multiple failed authentications followed by successful. If we just select one of these, we can actually have a look at the details of this incident. So here are the details. If we cleared this incident, we'd see a clear time. If we had an external integration with a ticketing system, we'd see that integration in here. We can also look at the events. So this allows us to understand what the events were, and this is a brute force authentication. So we can understand all of the failed authentications. We can also start to get more visibility of the raw event here. So we always have this raw event, as I've already mentioned, but we can drill down and have a look at all of the past attributes. And so we can see any enrichment that's occurred on these as well, such as geolocation. And we've also passed, importantly, the user from this. And then if we want to understand the additional pattern that occurred, which was a successful logon, we can see what the successful logon event was. We can see that again from the same source to the same destination, this user has successfully authenticated. From here, if we want to drill down into more information,